In December, I read 7 books, and for me, that was probably the best reading month I have had in all of 2025. So I'm going to go ahead and give you just kind of a brief rundown and some brief thoughts about each book. I don't want to take up too much of your time. I'm going to try to keep this video under 20 minutes. So here we go. So starting off, I read 11% by Maren Uthaug, and I actually did a full, like more in-depth review. I can just like link that up in this little corner over here. And needless to say, I was pretty disappointed in this when I picked up a copy of this book. At the time, I was actually writing my very first manuscript over the summer. I had gone through a few rounds of editing, and I had finally started getting into like the beta reader portion of the experience, and someone on Critique Circle had used this as a comp title for the book that I was writing. And obviously nothing is coming of that. I kind of like shit out around the beta reader portion of it all because I just realized that I just wanted to write the book. I didn't, ever intend on it being seen by anybody else. So even the fact that I got to the point of editing and getting it out to beta readers was much further along than I thought I was ever going to get. So yeah, so that was a really interesting experience. But like I said, someone used that as a comp title. And at that time, I was entertaining the idea of querying. So I was like, awesome, I'm looking for comp titles. Let me check it out. I had my sister send me a copy of this book all the way from America because I could not find a copy in English here in Greece at all. Needless to say, disappointing was like the most prominent feeling that I had reading this book. I am not going to continue the trilogy. I found out that this was a trilogy after I'd already received my copy that my sister sent me, and I did not care enough about these characters or this world or any of this to want to wait for the other books to come out and be translated into English. Sorry, I wish I could have liked it, but it just was not for me. If you do care to check out why, like I said, I have a more in-depth video on that. Then we have Dreadful by Caitlin Rozakis. This was so cute. Like, this was a satirical high fantasy novel in which our main character wakes up, has no memory, eventually realizes he's a dark wizard and that he is a part of this another evil wizard's plan to take over the world. And he's just trying to like fake it and pretend like he still knows what the heck is going on. Anyway, this was really cute. It was witty. It was the satire came through very clearly, and I just felt like this was such a great palate cleanser because the 2 books I had read before that being 11% and then the last book I read in November being Dracula by Bram Stoker, which I thoroughly did not enjoy, and I'm sorry to say, but it was nice to get to this dreadful book and kind of just like feel a little rejuvenated, like, fall back into step because I was getting pretty annoyed at the books that I had been reading. So that was really cute. I enjoyed this book very much. If you're looking for easy read, something funny, something witty, a nice moral at the end where you get the moral of the story literally, this is something that you might want to check out. So then after that, I felt very prepared to dive into my attempt of reading more nonfiction. Like, as a reader, I have not really enjoyed nonfiction books. It's just something about myself. But I decided I wanted to really lock in and try my hand at it, and that's what I did for these next 2 books. So I read Alexander the Great by Hugh Gethin. This was a Georgian press novel that was published in 1992. As I was like doing research for this video, I found that this is not a very common publication. Like, out of all the Alexander the Great novels that exist out there, this one is not very well known, at least as far as the research that I was able to do. You can barely find pictures of it online and all that kind of thing. This was exactly what it sounds like. So this is a general brief history of Alexander the Great's life and his conquests, some of his family history, who his father was and his mother and his siblings and all this stuff. I believe it was like 96 pages. There wasn't too much to say about this book. It was a nice quick overview of his life, and that was about it. There was nothing super in depth about it. It was very much straight to the point, which is about how far I'm going to get into my review and my thoughts of it. It was fine. It was good. It was a nice quick read. And I learned some stuff. So I chalk it up to a win. I rated this 3 stars because, again, it was just a very middle of the road, very average read. There was nothing super special about it. There was nothing I didn't particularly like about it. It was just like right in the middle, which is what I consider 3 stars. So yeah, moving on to the next book that I read. So this next one was also nonfiction. This was Don't Let Them Bury My Story by Viola Fletcher. I feel like I've talked about this book at some point. I can't remember where, in what video, or anyway, it doesn't matter. The point is that I read this in December, and this was again a pretty easy read. I think this was like 140 pages or something along those lines, something about around there. This was the last survivor of the Tulsa Race Massacre that occurred in 1921 in Tulsa, Oklahoma. And of course, unfortunately, Miss Viola Fletcher has passed away recently, and that's kind of how I had heard about this book, is I saw someone talking about it and I decided to check it out. It is an autobiography that she co-wrote with her grandson, Ike Howard. And this was very educational. I had known that the Tulsa Race Massacre occurred. This place was also known as Black Wall Street, and unfortunately, it's not something that is very commonly taught in American history classes in school. At least I never learned about it throughout high school and middle school. I heard about this as an adult. I just never knew too much about it. So this was a very interesting read. It was very educational. It was very heartbreaking to hear what this poor woman and her family had to endure, not only that night, but all of the suffering that they were forced to endure for years and even generations after. Her children, her grandchildren having to kind of bear that weight and that generational trauma of something, their entire life, their entire world being stolen from them. It was awful to read about, but it made me happy that she finally got to achieve her dream of traveling to Africa. Like, that was like her whole life. That was something that she had dreamt of, and I'm glad that her and her brother were able to kind of have that happen. And that was sweet to read about. May she rest in peace. If you're looking for any information about the Tulsa Race Massacre, if you want to learn more about it or you've never heard of it, this was a really great read. Very easy, very quick, and pretty straight to the point. The next book I read was Piranesi by Susanna Clarke, and this was a very interesting read. I've done a review on it right there if you want to check it out. But I thought it was very beautiful. I enjoyed it thoroughly. I'm not going to get too much into what it was about. It's basically about this man exploring a house. It's like a maze-like structure, okay? But it was one of those things where, because everyone ranted and raved about it so much, I had built up the anticipation.
You shiver with anticipation.
In my mind, that when I finally read it, I was just like, oh, okay, that was nice. That was cute. That was fine. But it wasn't as hard hitting as I thought that it would be based off of the way that everyone else talked about it. So I guess the moral of the story is I need to learn to temper my expectations for books that are highly talked about, because it might ruin the experience otherwise. I think I would have enjoyed it a lot more had I not heard so many fantastic reviews. I know that sounds kind of like counterintuitive, but that is genuinely how I feel. It was beautifully written. I enjoy more character driven stories, like introspective literary fiction. So this hit that mark for me. That is what this book is about. It is really just the analysis of one character's internal world. So if that does not sound very fun to you, then you might not enjoy this, but I did. And yeah, This was, Susanna Clarke has a very unique writing style in the sense that like, it wasn't too flourished. It wasn't trying to be anything too glorious, we'll say, but it was still beautifully written. Piranesi had a very distinct voice. He was a character that was very consistent throughout the book. The way that he spoke, the way that he talked, the way that he analyzed and critiqued and understood and uncovered things was very consistent, and I feel like that does just speak to Susanna Clarke's talents. Moving on to the next book that I read, this was The Everlasting by Alix E. Harrow. I'm not going to get too much into it on this video. I do plan on doing a review of it. It's probably not going to be very long, but maybe like 5 to 10 minutes or something of me just kind of talking about my general sentiments and thoughts on this book. But overall, this book was really cute. This was, in my opinion, a classic, like, romantasy, because the main storyline, the main plot was about the romance between our two main characters and how they kind of have to keep finding each other over and over again, because this deals a lot with time traveling. But then it has those like classic fantasy elements of dragons and swords and battles and war and all this stuff. So this was definitely nice that it was like classic fantasy romantasy, but like flipped on its head. The female main character was the knight and the male main character was the, cowardly historian, right? The smart intellectual one. Not to say that Una was not smart, just to say that like she was more like the broad-shouldered, tough, badass kind of character. So I really enjoyed that, and I've noticed because I had read Fractured Fables by the same author over the summer, and I enjoyed those. Something I've noticed about Alix E. Harrow's writing, just based on these two stories that I've read by her, is that she has a tendency to take classic fantasy tropes and just kind of like gender bend them, which I'm always a fan of. I'm into that. So, yeah, I'll talk a bit more about this in my actual review of the book, but this was the second to last book that I managed to finish before the year's end. Then we move on to the last book that I was able to complete, and I actually have this one in my top 10 list of the year. Again, I can just put that card up here somewhere, I think. The Everlasting was also on that list, but again, I do want to do a more in-depth review on that. So, Sorrowland by Rivers Solomon. This book was just absolutely mind-blowing, I guess. It took me a while to get through it, unfortunately, just because of my own reading schedule and everything like that. It took me like a month to actually read this because I was reading multiple books at the same time throughout this month. And I think I kind of want to take a step back from that in 2026. I've gone into this horrible habit of reading like 3 books at a time. And maybe for some people that's fine. But I'm noticing that it's kind of it's taking me longer to get through books because I keep hopping back and forth and between multiple books at the same time. So I think what I'm going to do is just kind of, because I like to have an audiobook on deck always, just because I walk to work every day. So I do like having audiobooks to listen to, or like while I'm working. It's just nice. But I think what I'm going to try to do is go back to this idea of doing like one physical book or one ebook and then one audiobook. So like only 2 books at a time, and making sure that at all times one is fiction and one is nonfiction, because I feel like that is so much easier to process and to get through the books when the 2 books are just so totally vastly different. Like one is more educational, being the nonfiction, and one is more like escapism, fun, entertaining kind of thing. Not to say that you can't get a lot out of fiction books. It's just to say that like it's hard going from one fiction novel to another fiction novel, even if they're 2 vastly different genres. It's just something about it for me that is hard to keep up with. Anyway, with that being said, even though it did take me a while to get through Sorrowland, This was such a beautifully written book. I have talked about River Solomon again and again and again. I'm not going to do that in this video. Like, what else can I even say? I just enjoyed it so much because out of all of their books that I have read by them, I just felt like this one was probably, as far as the relationship between the parental figure and the children, this was like the strongest relationship. This was the strongest dynamic in the sense of like a lot of this book was surrounding their relationship. Model Home was like that as well, but I felt like it was different. Like I don't know. I think that Sorrowland just hit me a bit differently because now that I'm thinking about it, that is kind of like a common theme that River Solomon talks about is parents kind of letting their children down and just trying to be better parents and like constantly trying to be better people and show up more for their kids. So I don't want to say that Sorrowland does that and then the rest of River Solomon books don't do that successfully. I just think more so in like the storyline lends itself to a more clear resolution than the other books. I mean, Model Home does have that resolution at the end as well, but I don't know. Something about Sorrowland just stuck with me a lot. Although for me personally, I enjoyed Model Home better. What am I really trying to get at here? I don't know. I liked Sorrowland. I love River Solomon's writing. They are very talented as an author. Sorrowland was a really strong read. I rated this 5 stars. There was nothing about this that I didn't like. I'll just say it like that. It was a good friggin' book. This was my December reading wrap up. I don't know why I'm being all jibbly blibbly. That's not a word. Anyway, until next time, guys.